Okay, hello. Welcome to On the Line, episode 89. Today I am joined by last week's guest, the Honourable John Silk. How you doing, John?
I'm doing good. Just arrived in Madrid. I've picked up a slightly unusual looking can of still water, but much needed because it's pretty hot here.
Of course, yeah. And you were in Barcelona, of course, last week, John. You really are doing the circuit at the moment, looking properly professional there in what looks like a press room, I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I hope I'm not annoying. Luckily, it's pretty quiet. It's the first day, so
Yeah, of
I'm
course.
probably annoying about 7 people rather than 70.
Love it, John. Thank you very much for coming on, as always. Today we are going to be covering everything that happened in the last week. So Alcaraz defeating Tsitsipas in Barcelona, defending his title there. Swiatek and Stuttgart beating Sabalenka, defending her title there. And Rune beating Van De Zandschulp in Munich, defending his title there. Of course, we did have Lajovic winning in Banja Luka in Bosnia and Herzegovina, right? But that was a little bit of a freak result. I'm not going to talk too much about that. We'll talk a lot about Novak at the tournament, but yeah, just acknowledging that was a pretty out of the blue result. I won't dwell on that. I'd like to speak about Djokovic because I'm sure that's what most people are thinking about. Do you know, actually, John, we'll start with Barca. Let's start with Barca.
Okay.
And talk about Alcaraz winning his second title there, defending his title, of course, defeating Stefanos for a second consecutive year, albeit the quarterfinals last year. This is now 4-love. Alcaraz in this head-to-head. I think this is the first thing I'm going to talk about. The fact that rivalry is pretty one-sided, and honestly, Steph hasn't had much of a chance from the get-go. Even when Alcaraz was in his kind of moulding phase in 2021, it still looked like a very, very unfair matchup. The main thing for me is the big kicker to the backhand, the big second serve, kick serve up high to Steph's backhand. Very, very difficult for him to get it back into play. He has been practicing the cross-court one, right? So, you know, when you kick it up high to his ad side, yeah, and he goes cross-court, he can do a little bit better than he used to there. But the real place he got unstuck when he played Alcaraz yesterday was in the juice court. Oh my God, how many returns did he miss on that side? It just looked like it was unfair at times. And when they did go to a rally, honestly, there was only one winner there as well. Alcaraz's ball's way too heavy for Steph a lot of the time. He's defending his backhand too much. Even when he does find a forehand, he's really clutching at straws, and he goes for forehands from positions he shouldn't be going for. How much did you see, John? What were your thoughts?
It was great being in the stadium. Of course, that Steph talked about it, and he said, listen, he compared it to Rafa-esque levels of RPM. And I also think that Steph, I think he was a bit perplexed. I think he didn't really know how to react afterwards. He reacted in quite a funny way by saying, take it easy, Mano, in his speech afterwards. And he also said, like, sharing is caring, give us a chance. And of course, that's 3 finals now for Steph. And I asked him afterwards about those 3 finals, how they compare. Does it feel better to, be very close like he was in 20, distant as he was, I think, in 2018, I think it was, and then yesterday it was distant, with the exception of the moment when he broke early on, but he just couldn't hold serve immediately afterwards. And as soon as Carlos broke back, it was kind of, you sort of felt that was it. It's weird to say that against one of the top 5 players in the world in Steph, and someone who's probably top 3 or 4 on this surface. Steph regressed a little bit on clay anyway since 2021. I just think that his backhand was solid during that period. We remember the performance against Rafa, albeit on a hard court in Australia, where it finished with a backhand winner down the line, which is just summed up his day that day or that night in Australia. But even through that clay court season, when he pushed Rafa to 3 sets, 3 hours and 42 minutes, that was a very different final. He was gutted after losing that final, but I think yesterday was kind of worse because I don't think he knew what the answers were. I asked him about those 3 finals, for example, in the press conference afterwards, and he went off on a tangent about, we know Steph can do these tangents, but he went off on a tangent about, it's not a team sport, which just was nothing to do with my question. And I don't really understand what he meant, but Steph then went down the alleyway, if you like, of talking about how heavy his balls are and just how difficult they are. And I think more difficult than ever.
Yeah, he also talked about his single-handed backhand in the press conferences as well, right? So yeah, he did acknowledge, obviously, Alcaraz's game is incredibly difficult for anybody to get over, But he made a point of saying the single-handed backhand shouldn't be inferior to the double-hander. Made a joke about opening an academy for single-handed backhands. Of course, I was laughing a lot at that. But honestly, again, it's, you don't know what to believe from Steph a lot of the time. He does look weak on that side, and a lot of other one-handers maybe don't. So I kind of get what he's... And I get what you're saying, John. That match he had against Rafa a couple of years ago, that was the best I've ever seen him play with, in terms of his one-handed backhand. I think he defended it so well then, and in that period in general, I agree. I think he was better then, so I don't really know what's happened. He's not got as much confidence going down the line, stuff like that.
I don't think he knows either. I think he's a bit perplexed. I think he doesn't know. I think he is probably 5% worse than he was in 2021. Certainly that backhand is a little bit less solid. It was always a weakness anyway. In the press conference, he said, everyone knows. It's not like I'm trying to hide it, or, it's not like when you're the club level, when we're sort of hiding our weaknesses when we're warming up, and then, or even hiding our strengths too. Everyone knows it. And yeah, Carlos, funny enough though, Carlos began the match ignoring it. I felt as though actually the first couple of games, he was actually catching Steph by surprise by going down the forehand side, and he actually produced a couple of winners on that. So just in the first couple of games, then he reverted to the tactic I think we all know and love against Steph. Steph said he thinks his slice has improved. That's quite possible, but then it probably couldn't get much worse, I would argue. But there's so many other elements to his game. And yeah, I think at the press conference, someone was sort of trying to take him down an alleyway of suggesting, it's the one-handed issue, which is why he responded in the way he did, being in the press room. I think that's why he sort of said, he defended him. I don't think he needs to defend a one-handed backhand. I don't think we're going to see it disappear, personally. It's just a moment in time. He also highlighted Federer, of course, and the way he turned around the rival with Rafa, where Rafa was bullying his backhand on occasion. Roger, that is, of course. And Steph said that's why Roger Federer was a legend, because he could work things out and improve.
There's definitely arguments for both sides. I get what Steph's saying. He's probably not a total liability, obviously, given he's number 3 in the world. But in this particular matchup, I think it is. And it's not the only reason he's getting beat, for sure. I honestly think times on the forehand he could have done better, because he was getting pressurised by Carlos so well. I mean, Carlos was one step ahead for the entire match. I loved what he said in the press conference about the difference from last year being concentration this year. The fact that he is just in every single point. He seems to know exactly what Steph's going to do at any time. He's got such an acute awareness of when Steph is falling back, throws in the drop shot, when to come forward. When Steph was slicing, he was just 2 steps ahead than Steph all the time.
And I'll get to the press conference question or points that Carlos raised as well in a second, but also in terms of the finals record now. So I agree with you, the matchup against Carlos, but if it was like a bad matchup with Carlos, if he's 3-0 or whatever it is, but then Steph was doing generally very well against in finals. But I think Steph's record in finals something like 9-17. I think something like that. Is it?
That sounds harsh, but then 0-10 in 500s. I mean, why not?
Okay.
That would make sense.
I think it's something like 1 in 3 he wins, I think, or 1 in 4. And then conversely, Alcaraz, I think, has lost 2 or 3 finals out of about 12, which is pretty impressive at the start. But coming back to Carlos and what he said in the press conference, he said, "Ni una pizca," and I had to ask him what he meant, or sorry, not what he meant. I had to ask in the press room after. I said, "What does that mean exactly?" And after it got translated and I worked it out, it meant not an inch. Last year, you dropped 3 sets on the way to the title. You played Steph. It went 3 sets. This year, you won without dropping a set, and you were very comfortable. I thought when I said the word comfortable, I thought he's going to try and say, no, it wasn't easy. But actually, he just accepted that. And he went straight forward by saying, listen, last year, I got in a position where I'd be 4-1 or 4-2 up, and I'd switch off. And that didn't happen this year. And that's when he comes to the Steph match in particular, where he said, once I had the advantage, I just seized it. I didn't give him a second, and I didn't give him an inch. That's what he concluded with there. Ni una pizca is like, didn't give him an inch. In other words, once I had him, I was ruthless.
Absolutely love that summary from him, and it's so true. This is only the second title, by the way, where he's won without dropping a set. Of course, Indian Wells being the last one. So, every other title, there's been some sort of scrapping at some point during the tournament. This is Alcaraz now kind of ascending to where he, past that 60% that Juan Carlos Ferrero talked about last year after the US Open. He is there now. Well, he's about there, probably like 70% if you asked Juan Carlos, why not? But he's getting there. It's very exciting. We'll move on from Alcaraz and Steph. Let's go to Banja Luka, where Novak was knocked out in the quarterfinals by eventual winner Lajovic. The question more is, should we be concerned? Now, the fact he is now pulled out of Madrid does make me a little worried. This is unprecedented, right? So every other year, there's been a slow start in Monte Carlo. Sometimes there's a slow start in the tournament preceding that. And then at Madrid, he tends to peak. I think every other year he has done really well at Madrid. Even last year, when he lost to Alcaraz in the semis, that was a very high-quality match, leading into good runs in Rome and a fairly good run in the French Open, getting beaten by, Rafa, who played really, really well. But every other year, it's been the same pattern. He's always played well at Madrid. He hasn't played so well previous to that for the last 7 or so seasons. Now I am a little concerned because there is only going to be so much time for him to warm up. Clay is not a good surface to just dive into and hope for the best, right? You need some sort of warm-up, particularly as Novak has been so serve-focused throughout the past few seasons, right? That does not happen on clay. There's a lot more forehand-centric points. We saw that in Monte Carlo. When he did lose, his forehand just nowhere near as good as it normally is. Very, very ropey. I am now concerned, John. Do you think he's a threat at the French Open?
Yes, I do. I'm not as concerned as you are, but I know a lot of people share your concern. No, I'm not as concerned. Rafa in particular, more than Novak, needs the repetitions, needs the matches, needs the tournament play, going into Australia, going into New York, etc. Going into the French, I don't think Rafa needs it that much. I have bigger concerns with him, but that's a topic for another day. But with Novak, he tends to hit the ground running faster than Rafa, especially on other surfaces. But I do agree with you that on clay, he's tended to get better and better and better. We've seen in Monte Carlo losing to Dan Evans. By the way, Dan Evans had a pretty good week in Barcelona as well. But losing to Dan Evans, I think it was a couple of years ago. Last year, he lost to Davidovich Fokina. He had that spell, of course, of not playing last year that went pretty much, with the odd exception, from January through to April. I know he played 1 or 2 tournaments, so that didn't help. This year he didn't quite have that, so I do think that might help him a bit, in that he's probably a bit closer to where he needs to be in terms of his game. What I would be interested in is were some comments, I think, from Goran or somebody in his coaching setup maybe 3 weeks ago that said he's building up a bit, just a bit more muscle, so he can get a bit more on his, a bit more heaviness, if you like, or certainly a bit more power on his shots. I wondered, though, if he was not pressing the panic button, but if he was fixing something that wasn't really broken, because it's not like he's that bad on clay. It's not like he's that far off. I actually disagree with Owen. Owen tweeted yesterday saying that, he thinks that Novak can look at that match against Rafa last year and go, well, I need to do something. I need to change because I need to do something to beat Rafa. But first of all, he might not have to beat Rafa this year. Secondly, that match was won. He was at a set point in the third set, or in the fourth set, sorry. And okay, I do think that there was a gap between the two players, but yeah. So I'm probably a bit more concerned about that. Actually, the injury, I think this is a precautionary measure. I've heard people suggesting the fact that maybe in Madrid that might put a bit more stress in terms of the conditions here on that elbow. He said, funnily enough, that really confused the whole situation is because we saw how it was kind of going into Monte Carlo. We saw him go out in Monte Carlo. We then heard him say about a week ago how he felt great and that Banja Luka was never an issue. And then even after, I think, his first match in Banja Luka, which wasn't comfortable either, I think that went 3 sets. I think he lost his first set there as well. But he actually said afterwards, no, shot, the elbow's not a problem. So that was then strange that he then goes out to Lajovic in the quarterfinals and then pulls out of Madrid. It sort of didn't make much sense, but I don't share your concern. If he pulls out of Rome, now that would be a different situation. If he pulled out of Rome, he'd probably play one of those. He's done a 3-week thing where he's played, I think, in Belgrade too, I think it was, in 2021, and when, of course, he went on to win the tournament. And I remember me being one of the people that speculated that week going, is he taking a bit of a risk here doing a 3-week stretch? Nah, He won the French Open. So
Yeah, you're right. I guess panic buttons can't really be pressed until Rome comes up. That's where, again, historically, Djokovic has always been there for Rome. Madrid, yeah, you're right. It's a different tournament, and really the priority is going to be preparing for the French Open. Madrid isn't exactly the tournament to do that. It's very different in terms of altitude, in terms of the delivery of serves, forehands. You're probably right. Precautionary could be the case, and actually Djokovic might know exactly what he's doing. But you're right. There's a lot of mixed signals. He's holding his cards quite close to his chest. It'll be very interesting to see how this one develops, because obviously without Djokovic at the French Open, without Rafa, it would be an incredibly open field. So yeah, it'll be interesting going forward. We'll leave Djokovic alone for now. I was going to move forward to Stuttgart, where Iga Swiatek also defended her title against Aryna Sabalenka. The two of them, of course, met in the previous final. Sabalenka first 3 finals lost on the bounce at this tournament. Iga, we didn't learn too much here, or maybe we did actually. I think there were question marks in terms of Iga's confidence in any match, in any tournament. Iga just reminded us she's an absolute beast on clay. This, for me, was the highest quality match that Iga has played all year, for sure. Because Sabalenka would be anybody else on tour playing like that. She played fantastically, returned fantastically, served well enough. So many returns just coming back that had no right to find the court from Iga. Cannot rush that forehand on the surface at the moment. Does not matter what's happened the past 4 months of the year. Iga's forehand was unbreakable at this tournament, and she didn't get broken against Sabalenka. That is insane statistics. There's no way you will get that again if she plays Sabalenka, I would imagine. I think this was about as good as we could ever see Swiatek. Am I getting a bit too excited, John?
No, I think you're right in addressing the confidence issue. Of course, she played her first 3-set match for about 27 years or something, because she's barely had one. We've known that she's either swatted players aside or she's gone out in a fairly limp fashion. But this time she had a sort of a mental hurdle to overcome. I think it was in her quarterfinal. Semi-final was Pliskova, who's actually now also got injured and pulled out of Madrid too. So that's a pity. Anjabur pulls up injured in that semi-final. Still no word from her, at least that I've heard until now. I am eagerly keeping an eye out, though, to see if she's going to... I imagine she will pull out Madrid. But listen, back to Swiatek in that final. The first 6 or 7 games, the level was insane. So that's also a good thing for Swiatek, that it's not like Sabalenka didn't turn up. And I think there were 1 or 2 moments with the serve, by the way, but we've spoken about that plenty with Sabalenka. But basically, this was Iga bringing her A game, and possibly for the first time in quite some time. I was going to say New York, but I don't think she brought her A game there. I'm sure there have been moments in the last 6 months when she's brought it, but she's probably not brought it on a consistent basis since that incredible unbeaten run from a year ago. I think this does sort of... I think a week ago there was probably a question of who's the favorite for the French, and most people would say Iga, but some people might put forward Krejcikova, some people might put forward Sabalenka. Now the question is, and I changed it I think yesterday, who's the biggest threat to Iga? And that's what yesterday did.
Yeah, absolutely. She was always... You're right. She was always the favourite for the French. I think you should make that clear. But there's people who might have put somebody else ahead of Swiatek. Now, I think unanimously throughout the tennis world, I mean, massive threat in finals still, massive threat on clay. This is where she can play her best tennis. She's got so much time on either side. She is definitely the threat at the French Open. And I think Sabalenka is her second contender. That was an amazing match. If she can raise her level just a touch more, that match becomes incredibly close with them both playing phenomenal tennis.
I'll just hold you a bit back on Sabalenka. It's just that the conditions in Stuttgart, maybe like the conditions in Madrid, are not the biggest. They're an indicator, of course, and a bigger indicator than the hard courts of North America. Although maybe even Indian Wells might give us a bit of a clue, given how slow it is there these days. But I get what you mean, because the form from Sabalenka over the last 8-9 months has been insane. Semi-finals, finals, winning. But I just think that Stuttgart might just be a bit of an outlier, a bit like Madrid. Of course, last year Swiatek didn't play Madrid, right? I think she pulled out, right? But this year she's going to play. So that'd be interesting to see how she deals with the conditions here.
That is a good point, and I'm going to put that asterisk in there that the last 2 times that Sabalenka's played the French Open, it's been a fairly convincing loss to Georgie and a fairly convincing loss to Pavlyuchenkova, and they were quite easy wins in the end for the 2 players. She kind of just went down very meekly. There had been that slam problem this time last year, and I think having overcome that and showing that she can still play a massive game against Swiatek on clay in the final, that's all just pointing towards, I think Sabalenka is going to have a good French Open run. I don't think she'll feel nervous. But you're right, the serve did cough up a few times on big points, right? But I still think the fact she could keep it incredibly close, even if the scoreline was actually 3-4, it was an incredibly close match. So I'm keen to see a first and second seed final, John, at the French Open. I think that would be amazing. Yeah.
Yep.
Moving on to Munich for the last thing we're going to cover this podcast, because it was a really good story. Saying that on Twitter, I think that's the story of the week, actually. In terms of heartbreak, I really wanted to see Botic Van De Zandschulp do it. And in the end, in Munich, a rematch of last year, this time without the retirement, of course. Botic has 4 championship points, all 4 of them fluffed on serve. So he was up 5-2 serving, 5-4 serving, 6-5 serving. And all 4 of them were really tight, cringy points. It was really brutal to watch. All credit to Rune, of course, whose game is solid enough to survive those really tense mental moments, rivaling Alcaraz in a lot of ways in terms of just, grittiness. But Botic should have done it, and it was really sad to watch. I don't know how much of it you saw, John.
I didn't, but I've seen the fallout afterwards, if you like, or the comments afterwards. There's the ankle injury, I think, that Rune incurred, and I've seen some people speculating, if you like, that was a convenient time to get injured. It does seem as though that there was no bad feeling between Rune and Botic himself, though I saw Botic tweet last night saying this one really hurts. And Rune responded in a way very sympathetically, but I also think you don't want to hear this. So the first line is, "Yeah, I understand. You played great. That's fine." He then says, "But I also know how you feel, because last week I was almost 5-1 up in Monte Carlo," and I'm thinking,
yeah, I saw that.
I don't know if that quite. First of all, Monte Carlo's a 1,000. Secondly, it wasn't 5-1. Thirdly, he didn't have match points. Fourthly, as you and I speculated, he didn't really choke. There was a couple of smashes. I don't.
Fifthly, Botic doesn't have a title.
Yeah.
He's not won a title on the tour. That just makes it sting even more. Yeah, there's a wee bit of immaturity there, I guess.
I don't think Rune realizes that he's trying to be nice when he says that line, but it's like, I know how you feel, but I don't think you do, Holger. I don't think you do.
Yeah, exactly. No, I couldn't agree more. A little bit. He's trying to be nice. You're right, but he, just didn't read the room quite as well as he could have there for sure. But yes, sore for Botic for sure. I mean, it'll come. He's a good enough player. That's 2 finals now at the same tournament. But if that continues to be a problem, intense moments, that can really ruin people. I mean, we remember Julian Beneteau back in the day. I don't know if you know about his finals record, but I believe
Tell me.
0-10. So it did start to become a proper mental issue. Obviously, 2 finals, it's not the end of the world. He's relatively near the start of his ATP career. I wouldn't worry about it at the moment, but it can really spiral out of control, as we've seen with other players. Manarino as well was bad for, I think it was like 0-7 before he won his first one. So fingers crossed.
Felix as well.
Felix, of course. Yeah, Felix is, how could you forget Felix? He's the most obvious one, in fact. But yeah, fingers crossed for Botic. He should be good enough. Now the highest ranked player, though, without an ATP Tour title, Alejandro Davidovich Fekina, a close second. Both of them would expect eventually will get their first titles. Fingers crossed.
You mentioned Davidovich Fekina. Yeah, I actually think that he was probably the person who pushed Carlos closest last week. It was 2 really tight sets. There was lots of breaks in the first. So, if you said to me, Botic or Alejandro, which one's going to break their duck, say, in the next 12 months, I'd probably go Alejandro. I hope for Botic as well, because I think you're right. He does need it.
At the same time, small tournaments on clay nowadays in the ATP are few and far between. And does Alejandro win a Masters 1000? You wouldn't count on it particularly, would you? So there
No,
will
but
be
an
there will
Estoril, I mean, that would have a chance from
yeah.
a couple of weeks ago.
Absolutely, yeah. Those sort of tournaments you'd really expect would be the place he would get his first title if he does get it. John, I would like to tie up just before the half-hour mark, so thank you very much for joining me. Great stuff as always. Very, very keen again to get you on because you're at Madrid. I mean, who better to call? So if you're up for it, I'd love to see you again soon.
Definitely, yeah. Just let me know as and when.
Cool, John. Thank you very much for joining us on the On the Line Tennis podcast. Go check John at jsilk on Twitter and Talking Tennis, of course, as well. Myself at On the Line_Jack. You can find us on YouTube. Please like, please subscribe. Thank you very much for joining us. Catch you next time on the On the Line Tennis podcast.
Cheers.